We will never shut down our churches again. This is what hundreds of pastors from across the country are saying because of how American churches were declared non-essential and treated unfairly when the Rona broke out a few years back. Some pastors are trying to recruit other church leaders to sign a new document promising to keep their churches open the next time government tries controlling worship or shutting down services. Now, I recently interviewed a few of these godly men who are leading the cause, and they all agree there's a time to preach and there's a time to fight. I'm David Fiorazzo, and this is Christ and Culture. Pastors Bill Cook from Virginia and Stephen Mannion of New York were on Stand Up for the Truth podcast last month discussing a brand new movement to get church leaders in the U.S. to commit to staying open, serving the people, equipping the saints, and not closing down in the face of any threat or emergency. Now, these and other bold pastors declare the government violated the U.S. Constitution during the pandemic. How? By ordering churches to close, and then others by limiting where and how many people could attend services. Hebrews 10:25 is a verse in the Bible that encourages believers to stir up one another and to not neglect meeting together. In other words, keep gathering, keep assembling, and do the work of the church in your community. By the way, the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution says this: Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble. Now, Bill Cook is founder of America's Black Robe Regiment. He's a pastor out of Virginia. That's an organization of politically active Christian leaders dedicated to preserving the blessings of liberty. He and Stephen Mannion, pastor of Faith United Methodist Church in Lancaster, New York, drafted what is known as this statement, the Acts 5:29 statement. In early church days in Christian history, what happened was the Jewish leaders in Jerusalem used their political power to arrest the apostles and demanded they stop preaching about Jesus and his resurrection. But Peter and the apostles answered and said, "We must obey God rather than men." That is Acts 5:29. So Stephen Mannion said this movement of American pastors is warning a secular government not to try closing the church again. He said it won't go so well next time. Now you might think, friends, this is not a big deal. But let's recall what happens when people who are hurting, afraid, depressed, or worse, have no place to go for help, hope, prayer, or healing. Back in 2020, when government closed or severely limited churches, it affected charities, in-person Bible studies, small groups, counseling services, prayer meetings, community outreach, and more. What we saw was dramatic increases in fear, isolation, anger, alcohol and drug abuse, including deaths associated with these factors. Depression skyrocketed. Suicide rates spiked to record highs, claiming more than 186,000 lives in America alone by suicide. Now, in a recent interview with The Blaze, the pastors explained how the government overstepped its authority during the pandemic. And Stephen Mannion said this, quote, "Bodily autonomy and parental rights were often stripped away. Livelihoods were lost. Dedicated servicemen and women were forced to retire or be cut from our armed forces. Students were robbed of an education, and all for an infection fatality ratio, IFR, of much less than 1%. Now, the true numbers, what we know now, They don't justify the fear and panic porn the media and the leftists promoted nonstop to get the public to comply with the mandates. And what about the double standards and hypocrisy that we all know about now of secular government allowing so-called essential businesses at the time to remain open, like abortion clinics, essential, bars, grocery stores, I do understand. Corporations like Walmart, though, kept stores open with hundreds of people scurrying around the stores, right? You know it. You were probably one of them. By the way, no one forced people to go to church. But services were called super spreaders, but not Walmart. Our nation needs good churches, friends. We need to stay open because, as Mannion rightly stated, the soul is of infinite more value than the body. Now, it's interesting. The inspiration for the Acts 5:29 statement came in part from another pastor I spoke with earlier this year. His name is James Coates out of Grace Life Church in Edmonton, Canada. James Coates was imprisoned for keeping his church open, and he co-authored the book. I happen to have it right here because I interviewed him. The book is called God versus Government. It explains the Bible's teaching about submitting to government and when we are not to. It provides context, especially on Romans 13, and it recounts efforts to defy lockdown orders in Canada and the U.S. Here's part of the Acts 5:29 statement. It says this: "We reject any presidential or gubernatorial decree requiring us to disobey the word of God. We will resist any attempt by a federal, state, or local official to restrict or prohibit the free exercise of our religion or place restrictions thereon." It continues, "We affirm our submission to lawful civil authority as instituted by God himself, but when rulers exceed the scope of their constitutional and God-given authority, they act contrary to their office and the public good and effect the ruin and misery of society." So their goal, these pastors, is to get 5,000 signers and then to send the document to local, state, and federal government officials. Now, the world is getting darker and darker, it's obvious, but as Jesus said in Matthew 5:14, we are the light of the world. So the church must be the church. True believers must do the work that God called us to do, and to do that, churches have to stay open. God bless you, and keep speaking the truth about things that matter.